right.
All right.
Let's see if we got it. So,
Yeah, so my practice is going pretty well. Um, Last time at the end, we talked a bit about um, mindfulness in daily life, like setting a reminder to take mindful breaths.
mm-hmm.
So I've been working on that, having some. I actually got a timer, but I've yet to really set it up in the way that I like. I'm still struggling with the settings, so that it's not too intrusive, just on vibrate. And there's some technical things I'm trying to work out, but in the meantime, I'm still relying on just my mind's ability to be mindful. And I've actually had some nice experiences of um, waking up in the morning, and first thing I do is like turn off the alarm and then take a mindful breath. So that was really nice. So there's some things happening in my mind. There's some remembering going on.
Very good. Very good.
Yeah. So, but I'm still far from, like, there's still a lot of room to grow in that area. Let's put it that way.
All right. And let us call that happy growth. Um, One of the things that I think that Westerners misunderstand is that they think, you see, it has to do with goal oriented,
Mm.
being goal oriented. And recently, I have been watching. Um, let us give it the catchphrase Zen and the art of Japanese archery.
Yeah.
From how they make the bows, why they're different than the English longbow, uh, why the tips of the arrows are the way that they are, etc., like that. But the most important thing that's happened with the Japanese archery since the 12th and 13th centuries, when Zen came, is now almost all of the archery practice in Japan is around um, the idea of it being a spiritual practice rather than merely an archery practice. In America, you would think of archery practice is, can you hit the target? And possibly the ultimate goal is, can you do a Robin Hood?
Yeah.
Which means that one arrow goes right down the middle of the previous arrow. All right, so, but in Japanese uh, archery, all of the work is done on the human body. An example of that is training on a wooden horse so that you can learn to steer the horse without using your arms and hands, etc. Because, in fact, in Japanese archery, uh, it was done by the samurai who had horses. More modern archery does not necessarily use the horse. But the point is, with the archery, is doing the form correctly. Exactly how the bow is held, why it's held at the place that it's held. When the bow is brought back, or when actually, yes, when they're bringing the arrow into shooting position, they have a particular style. All right, and that style does it with both arms at the same time. But the important point that I'm wanting to point out here is that all of the Japanese archery has nothing to do with hitting the target, and it has everything to do with performing their archery correctly.
Yeah.
All right, and if they perform the archery correctly, then that's more important than whether they hit the target or not. That the target, hitting the target becomes secondary, but doing the archery correctly with the form and the body and the breathing, especially, and all of that kind of stuff. Now, the reason that I'm bringing this up is because I want you to understand that your meditation practice is going to be lasting the rest of your life.
I
And it
hope
has
so.
very little to do with goal orientation. That in fact, possibly what our goal is to no longer have goals, but to perform our daily life correctly, moment by
Mm.
moment, just like the Zen archery of doing everything exactly correctly with the body, with the position of the legs, uh, and all of that. And it's actually quite an amazing thing to watch some of these videos uh, that are on YouTube about Japanese archery. But the important point is that it's now a spiritual practice. And so if you can watch that video and get that point, and you'll recognize that your daily practice of meditation should be in that same regard, that we're not looking for a goal. A lot, and the Westerners have the idea that enlightenment is a goal. Full enlightenment is a goal to achieve. And the answer is not. That in fact the goal of becoming enlightened is actually a burden to carry. That I have to do this, I have to get that goal. My intention is to get that fixed. Rather than looking at it that no, real enlightenment is being able to live an easy life
Yeah.
without having any goals.
Yeah, I really like the way Tanisaro talks about this, where he says that ultimately you want to get to that place where you let go of craving, or there is no more craving, there's no more like goal seeking. But the way I think he phrases this is we're not there yet. So in the meantime, we kind of still need drives and goals, so better make them wholesome.
That still has that quality of future in it when you look at the phrase not there yet.
Yeah.
If we can take that phrase out of it and substitute the phrase do it right now
Yeah.
and not worry about can I do it into the future, that I'm doing it right now. That's the important point. How do I feel in this moment?
Mm.
And making the statement of um, we're not there yet actually, in a way, is judging this present moment. I'm not good enough right now, which is a victim's position. A much better way of looking at it is we're there right now.
Yeah, I'm having trouble seeing it that way because obviously in my mind there are still many hindrances a lot of the time.
But
Um,
we're not looking at the hindrances as, let us say, a collection of memories. And
yeah,
in this regard, I'm talking about a collection of memories of having hindrances. Rather, the way to look at it is can I clean the mind out right now?
mm,
And can I be successful? Can I claim that success right now? Is this
yeah,
moment good enough? The answer is, oh, yeah, it's good enough.
yeah. I guess I still feel like there is a place for, and I think maybe I'm just phrasing it differently than you. I still think there's some place for goals, and I mean,
If there
striving
is,
is,
then the goal would be for skill development. And rather than striving, look at it in the sense of persistence. So what we're doing is we're changing our focus on the idea of right effort being a right ordinary effort into a right noble effort. Ordinary right effort is still goal oriented, wanting things to be better than I judge them to be. But that's the habit that you've been in your whole life. That's the Western mentality.
yeah,
The question is, can we change our attitude to right now is good enough?
yeah. I don't really see how that fits together with the goals I very obviously have, and that I think I rightly have. For example, I want to develop my concentration. I want to develop my mindfulness. I want to develop compassion and ethical behavior and morality and all those things. So those are very obviously goals.
Okay. And wanting things that you don't have is very exactly suffering. Is one of the definitions of dukkha. Is wanting things that you don't have. And that's what makes that archery, the Japanese archery, so curious. Is that much of the practice that the students are putting in is the practice of just doing this movement right now correctly, and to not be interested in where the arrow goes. So
Yeah,
the arrow hitting the target is always in the future. But
yeah,
the archery itself is all about how to hold the bow, how to hold the arrow, how to operate the body
yeah,
in order to do this process exactly correct. And that some of those archers do it by training on a wooden horse that they have a friend who's spinning it around in a circle. And then eventually they get onto a real horse. Now, in the West, the horse would come first. Oh, I'm going to learn to shoot out a bow on a horse. And so they'll go get the horse first. Where, in fact, the horse is almost, not exactly, not 100%, but let us say maybe 50%, the horse doesn't even matter. That it all has to do with how the rider is going to maneuver his own body with very strong thigh muscles to guide that horse to make it stay on course, because now he's going to put all of his concentration on his form. And in fact, the narrator points out that this archer has just now lost his form, and because of that, he's not going to be able to get it back together again in order to get the next arrow out. Because he's on horseback, and because he's lost his form, he's not going to get the next arrow. All right, so in fact, keeping our form exactly correct in archery is exactly the same thing as keeping the form correct with the mind right now in Dhamma practice. It's exactly the same thing. I can see why when Buddhism went to Japan, wow, were they ready for it?
yeah. It's a very
Because they had
Zen way of
already.
looking at it.
Hmm?
That's a very Zen way of looking at meditation.
Hmm. Because they had already been practicing fearlessness. And so there's a lot of stuff that was fitting into the Japanese society before Buddhism got there that indicated that this practice of Buddhism is actually going to take over the martial arts.
Yeah.
And so let's get back then to that idea that an example of that is you want more concentration. At that moment of wanting more concentration, you're not concentrated.
Yes. Yeah.
All right? Because you're wanting something that you don't have. So, a
Yeah.
better way of doing it is learn to enjoy the concentration you have right now.
Yeah. That's more of a way of phrasing it that I can relate to, because um, I've had that experience and I can see that it's a hindrance. It's a distraction when that thought comes up in meditation of like, I want my meditation to be different. Oh, a distraction. Let it go. Keep going.
Excellent. Excellent.
So
Exactly so.
that's why I thought we might just be phrasing it differently, because I'm having a hard time relating to the Zen style of talking about things, and of um, it doesn't resonate with me very well for some reason. I don't know why.
Well, I don't know if this is any consolation or not, but I know a few Westerners who have been in Thailand as long as I have or longer, who have learned the Thai language much better than I, but they still are 100% Westerner. And I
Hmm.
think that has a lot to do with when they come with a job or with business to do, and they're not really interested in becoming Thai. But the Westerners who come because of Buddha Sasana, they recognize that, oh, this Thai culture is a Buddhist culture.
Hmm.
And so that's one of the jokes now is 20 years ago I was about 50% Thai, but now my family recognizes I'm about 80% Thai. There's very little Westerner left. All right. So that's exactly what we're getting at with this story that you're telling me is that fitting into the Zen mindset is foreign to you, but you haven't spent 40 years in it yet.
I haven't spent 40 years in anything yet.
Yes, I know. But sometimes it takes 40 years to get over 20 years of bad training.
Yeah. I guess I resonate more with kind of the like Southeast Asian way of teaching this stuff, like more of the Theravada style of teaching it. And I feel like often it just boils down to the same thing in the end. It's
It
just a
is
different
exactly. I
way
was
of getting there.
just about to say that.
Yeah. It's yeah, I'm just not warm, like I think Zen is really really cool from an aesthetic point of view. Like I really enjoy the, like for example, like Zen monasteries, I feel like look like very amazing places, but it doesn't, it's more of a like strange fascination, like something that seems very foreign to me.
Well, I was only using Zen archery as an example, but really what we're looking at has nothing to do with Zen or archery, and it has everything to do with not paying attention to the goal
Yeah.
of hitting the target and more of am I doing things right now correctly up to my own standard or up to the
Yeah.
standard of my teacher.
Yeah. I actually think I made some real progress in that when I first started talking to you, because previously to that I was really caught up a lot of the time in exactly this wanting things to be different, not enjoying my meditation sessions, thinking I should be further along on the path. I'm putting in all this time. Why isn't it working? Getting more and more miserable, getting annoyed, frustrated, getting depressed, because I didn't enjoy the moment. There was always this, I want to reach this goal, and it was really obvious. It was not like some subtle craving in there. It was like, I'm doing this to get X. I'm not getting X. I hate this. That's how it was that extreme for me. And so talking to you about right attitude and never mind, start again, and really taking that less serious was, that's what keeps me going. I couldn't do it otherwise.
Well, we need to keep focused on that, in the sense of focusing on the moment and not expecting actually, if there's anything expectation you can do, is the expectation is that the right effort, right noble effort, becomes right energy. If there is any expectation, it's that when one is doing right effort and gaining the skill and developing the habit of right effort, that it becomes easier. In fact, we have an exact phrase for it in the English language. And that phrase is getting used to it. We can get used to anything. And here's a silly little point about that. What does getting used to being enlightened look like or feel like?
I wouldn't know.
Or in another way, if one is enlightened long enough, do they become bored with being enlightened? The answer to that is that boredom and enlightenment don't have a whole lot to do with each other, but the Western mentality is the answer to that. Yes, one can be enlightened long enough to become bored with it, only when we do not understand the actual definition of enlightenment.
Yeah.
Because enlightenment in that kind of situation is a state of being that we reach, as opposed to a method that we enjoy the moment in. In that regard, the Eightfold Noble Path of the Eightfold Method is enlightenment itself. Being on the Eightfold Noble Path, intentionally being on the Eightfold Noble Path, is enlightenment itself. And when we miss the target, or we fall in the ditch, we're not watching where we're going in one moment and we wind up in the ditch. If we can get ourselves out of the ditch, dust ourselves off, and start following the path again, then we're enlightened again. And it's only when we're in a ditch that we're not enlightened. And when we're not in the ditch and on the Eightfold Noble Path, then that is enlightenment. Now, this is another way of talking about it, is that the state of Sotapan is the place where we stop with this wrong effort idea. That all of the work that's done on your spiritual journey will be done to become Sotapan. Why? Because once you have the fruit of Sotapan, then the rest of the journey is real easy, because you've got the right effort.
I like that. It gets easier instead of harder. That's what I'm on board for that.
When one has right effort, then the skill of right effort becomes right energy.
Yeah.
And that's why it's phrased the way that it is as an enlightenment factor. That sati is a factor of the path to be mindful. And when we become mindful, unremitting, when it keeps coming back, and let us say coming back long enough or soon enough so that we don't wind up in the ditch. And if we are in the ditch, we recognize that we're in the ditch very quickly, and then we come back and get on the path again. This is
Yeah.
unremitting. It does not mean permanently staying out of the ditch.
Yeah.
All
This
right.
actually
So
resonates.
unremitting mindfulness means we keep
Yeah.
coming back and coming back and coming back. So noble right mindfulness becomes an enlightenment factor when we do it the way that I'm teaching it, in the sense of setting the timers or whatever like that. But is only practiced correctly when you do the right thing when that timer happens. In the sense of, oh, this is a nibbana moment. Oh, this is what it's like to be free from suffering right now.
Mm.
Okay? Always right now oriented.
Yeah.
So unremitting mindfulness fits in with unremitting investigation. Now, unremitting investigation fits in precisely and says so right in Sutta number 117 is noble supramundane right view. That noble supramundane right view is, in fact, an investigation to continue to investigate. So the second factor of enlightenment is unremitting investigation of the states of mind, the states of the situation, keeping our eyes open, looking at it like that.
Mm.
The third one of unremitting effort, excuse me, right effort, right noble effort. When we're doing right effort means that when the moment comes that we recognize that we're falling out of into the ditch, is the effort that it takes to get up and get out of the ditch.
Yeah.
Well, when we start practicing a lot about getting up and getting out of the ditch, then we become pretty good at it. In fact, it becomes almost effortless, and in that regard, it's called unremitting energy.
Mm.
It's
Yeah.
energetic. Why? Because we've got the skill now to get up and and to recognize that we've done wrong, make amends for it, dust ourselves off, and start all over again.
Yeah.
So we got three of them. The last one, the next one, then is kind of the right attitude. Right noble attitude is a joyful, joyous
Yeah.
attitude that has the power of success. Well, the fourth item on the list of the seven factors of enlightenment is this joy, unremitting joy. The unremitting joy, the unremitting pleasure comes from not that we don't ever go into the ditch, but that we can happily and joyfully get ourselves out of the ditch when we're in the ditch, and joyfully and happily actually admit that we're in the ditch
Yeah.
and come out of it and get out of the ditch. All right. And so, in that regard, the Eightfold Noble Path and the seven factors of enlightenment are exactly the same thing. And it took me years to figure that out, because it basically brings up conflicts between several suttas. Because one sutta says, oh, do the Four Noble Truths, and the other sutta says, oh, no, do the seven factors of enlightenment. And one would get confused until one actually recognizes, oh, no, the seven factors of enlightenment, the Sambojana, is nothing but the way of looking at at least the first four of the Eightfold Noble Path. But when
Yeah.
you recognize right noble concentration is and unification of mind is also the same thing as unremitting sati. So that one's there too. In fact, the whole 9 yards is really amazing that it
Yeah.
works out just that way. But you can see that really what's going on is language. The issue is language. The issue is how do we describe something that is indescribable?
Mm.
And that the Tao Te Ching starts off that way. The Tao that can be stated is not the Tao. Well, Lao Tzu Chung didn't know the Buddha because the Buddha has found the impossible. He has found not only the path, but he's found a way of expressing that path so that people can figure out what he's saying.
Mm.
And then they can apply it. But when you apply it to your own mind, you don't apply it in the verbiage of Four Noble Truths, Eightfold Noble Path, um, Seven Factors of Enlightenment, and all of that. We express it in this regard as
Yeah.
a deep, happy sigh, I guess. So when we look at it like that, this whole frame of reference around this issue of right effort and right attitude, one's right attitude is that you're already enlightened right now. And who knows about the future? Not sure about the future. But right now, this is pretty darn good. This is good enough. This is
Yeah.
satisfactory. So that's what we need to be looking for is not what do I need to do yet, but rather is this moment good enough? And if it's not, what can I do to make this moment good enough? Well, the answer to that is throw out whatever was making it not good enough. Stop thinking those thoughts and start thinking happy, contented thoughts instead,
Yeah.
thoughts of this moment.
On that point, um, I've actually been finding that um, when I'm sitting, a lot of the time there's just smiling coming up for no reason, um, which I guess is a good sign. Um, there's a lot of I think that's exactly what you were referring to, where it's just this is like nothing. I'm not having special states of concentration or anything. It's just spontaneously happiness and satisfaction and joy just come up. And I've never had that before in my life, which is probably a sad thing to say, but it's just sitting there
No,
and
it's a
suddenly,
wonderful thing to say.
yeah, I was referring to the part where I hadn't had that before, at least in a very long time, or
But the
not that I
past
can
is not
remember.
here. The
Yeah,
past is gone.
I guess,
Let us not ruminate over the past.
yeah. So it's just coming up out of nowhere, it seems, and it's just it often it's just like a very subtle smile, like a little Buddha statue smile, but then sometimes it's like it's even getting to a very broad smile that also like on the whole face and in the whole body.
I know what you mean. In fact, here at the house, from time to time, I'll be laughing at something, and Tam looks around to see what I'm laughing at. And I'm not laughing at anything. I'm just laughing.
Yeah.
Not on the internet, not doing anything, just chuckling. Now, to answer that question about where does the smile, where does the laughter come from, that it just sorts of bubbles up. The answer to that can be sought by asking another question, and that is where do feelings come from? In other words, where do bad feelings come from? Because the good feelings are going to be coming from about the same place, and that is something buried deep inside that is instinctual. And if we're operating at an instinctual level for feelings, and that now that we're beginning to train the instinct, so that instead of always coming up with confused feelings or bad feelings, now we just spontaneously come up with good feelings. But the good feelings are not object oriented. It's not like, oh, I feel good because of that and therefore I want it. It's just, I don't know why I feel good. I just do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we do that through the skill development. And so as you develop skill, you'll get used to more things. So getting used to right noble effort is going to become unremitting energy. That's just the process of getting used to things.
Yeah.
All right. So that's why we want to continue to do the practice. That's in fact part of the quality of the full fruit of Sotapan is that the young monk, or in your case as a Dhamma dude in the West, we just simply start paying more and more and more time. Our attention is put into Dhamma.
Mm.
One of the places, in fact, at stage 5, it's said that even though the monk has his duties of the temple, for instance, sweeping or whatever, or like the work that you're doing, still he's thinking about the Dhamma. That he can broom enough, he can sweep well enough, but when he's sweeping, he's thinking about Dhamma. The next example, and by the way, this is what we mean by character. One who has the character of one who has right view. The character of one who has right view is to maintain one's right view, and one's right view naturally then becomes focused on Dhamma. And in this regard, I'm actually changing the definition of the word Dhamma. And an easy way to understand why I can do that is by using the idea that the word Dhamma is equivalent to the English language word thing. So when we say the Buddha Dhamma, we're saying the Buddha's thing. But that's different from that thing over there.
Yeah.
And that when we look at it in the sense of the entire universe, we're just in a universe of thing or of things. Whether
Mm.
that thing is a physical thing, a star, a molecule, an idea, a feeling, whatever it is, it's just a thing. And so I'm using the Dhamma that way also. But we can use the word thing related in the sense of the Buddha Dhamma. It's not just the small teachings of the Dhamma of the Buddha, but it's the broad teaching, the entire river or flood of reality that we're in. The Buddha uses the word uh, flood sometimes to cross the flood, but I don't know why they use that word then to talk about the stream enterer, because in fact to actually what the stream
Mm.
enterer does is he enters the flood. It's sort of like this. If you're a human being standing on the bank of a fast-running brook that's, let us say, 10 feet across, then to you it's still just a stream. But now be a leaf. And the
Okay.
perspective changes, and all of a sudden this is not a brook anymore. This is not a stream. This is a flood. Now, um, there's an opposite analogy to that, and I noticed this several years ago, standing on a bridge, watching the pylons that were the supports for the bridge, and how the water swirls around them and creates eddies,
Hmm.
and then noticing a leaf getting caught in that eddy, and recognizing that the leaf itself, even if it were fully conscious, would not be conscious of anything other than the fact that it was just in the water. That's the water that's in the flow, in the eddy, in the swirl, and that the leaf is doing nothing, just sitting still. So that's how we have to kind of look at it, that entering the stream or becoming a stream enterer is actually to recognize that we're just in a flood, and we've got nothing to do except just to sit here and swirl when the flood swirls, and go straight when the flood goes straight, and sort of go with the flow.
Yeah.
Now, I use that word flow in this regard because there is another use for the word flow that's very, very interesting and closely related. Because I've had over the years a number of people who were, let us say, even more dedicated to martial arts than I was, that I only got up to brown belt. But um, those who have the black belts and the dans, they talk about being focused and in the flow when they're in a boxing match or when they're sparring with someone. That in fact, the one who is not watching what's going on because he's lost in thought, he's not in the flow, and he's going to get punched. So the idea of with martial arts of being in the flow is exactly the same thing as being in first jhana, because their mind is not hindered. If their mind is hindered, if their mind is in hindrance, they're getting beat up. They've got to really be here now. That's the whole point of
Yeah.
the martial arts. That's another idea about why the Japanese Zen or the Japanese martial artists of the 13th century got so deep into Buddhism so quickly to the point that Buddhism actually took over their martial arts. That instead of doing martial arts for martial arts' sake, now they're doing martial arts for mental training instead. And there's a lot of these shows on YouTube that are trying to point that out, but I think most people don't get the point.
Yeah, it's not as flashy as like punching a stack of bricks with your hand.
Yes, but if you don't do the form right, you're going to break your hand, not the bricks. I
Yeah.
know I've got a broken hand right here with a big knot on it that never quite healed correctly because I didn't have my hand straight when I hit that guy. So the form is really the important thing in this regard, and in that, and within our meditation, that's what we mean by right noble attitude, or that excuse me, right noble view, or seeing things straight. Get the form right. Do the investigation. Watch what you're doing. Now, we're not practicing martial arts, but you can see how martial artists use body forms and things like that to do the mental training that they need to do. We're actually doing it the hard way because we're using just the mind itself to train the mind rather than having an occupation
Yeah.
to do it. But the important thing here that we're dealing with is to get out of the idea of wanting things to be different than they are, wanting things to be better than they are, to actually enjoy that they are wonderful right now.
Yeah. I One thing that's been happening in my practice recently that I think fits in nicely here is um, in in the Mind Illuminated, there's a lot of focus on the stages, as you know. And one thing that I used to struggle with a lot is wanting to be in a higher stage than I actually am. So wanting that progress again. And one thing that's been happening recently to me is I'm finding that when my practice is not going well, in terms of there's a lot of hindrances, there's a lot of distractions, um, I'm not getting annoyed at that as much, or hardly at all sometimes, to where I'm still appreciative of whatever is there, even if it's not what I originally wanted. So I'm not giving myself a hard time for example, falling into mind wandering. And it's in the beginning I had to consciously remind myself of that, and now it's happening more automatically, where um, it's not so much about that achieving anything. Like, I'm not going in saying I want to achieve stage 4, let's say. I'm going in with the attitude of let's see what happens and let's see what I have to work with today, and being more accepting of whatever comes up, even if it's difficult emotions or hindrances, distractions.
I don't know Chuladasa's 10, 10 points in the sense that I could rattle them off. But I would assume, based upon what I have heard about and from him, that he's just picked up things from the Dhamma and put them on this list.
Yeah, it's actually derived from a really old list from like the 12th century or something, from some commentary, and
Mm-hmm.
he modernized it, restructured it a bit, and there we have it.
Now, there's two ways that we can use such a list. One is we can use it in the sense of after making progress, that we can use such a list to recognize the progress that has already been made because of the items that have been checked off the list. Or you can use it from the position of a to-do list, but the to-do list uh, is I want this and I want that, and so it's as he was suffering. But if you can use it in the sense of retrospectively checking it off, oh yeah, that's been done, yeah, we've been there, done that. Now that's a much more pleasurable way of looking at such a list. So in fact, the right way to look at a list is only after you finish the list. Then you go and you check the list to see, hey, did I do that? Yeah, got that one too, right? Done that, been there, done that. That's the way to look at these lists rather than a to do list.
Mm.
And that I imagine that some of these things that are on that list are, hmm. Remember, I think that I told you about that the path is a path of determination.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, that it's a path which means that the steps that you're going to make are steps that are made because you have determined to make those steps, as opposed to uh, a list of things that you read out of a book.
Mm.
And so, if you can use it like that, also So these list of 10 things, instead of being at step 2 and lusting for step 7 or 8, then the right thing to do is to be determined that you're going to do step 2 correctly.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm doing. That's exactly this switch from wanting to get to the higher stages or wanting to get to the jhanas or to get anywhere at all, and instead to actually see what's happening today in this session and then work with that appropriately and skillfully. That's what I'm trying to do.
Excellent, excellent, good, good.
And that's actually really nice because it takes off a lot of stress of oh, today it's not, I'm only in stage 2 instead of 3 or 4. Oh God, I'm a horrible human being. Let's judge my, let's get all of this negative self-talk going. No, it's just, okay, that's where I am. That's where I need to work. And I'm actually happier than before.
Exactly. All right. Now, you do know that Tanisaro almost invariably translates the Pali word dukkha as stress.
Yes.
In that way, you can see immediately that that students reading Chuladasa but not having proper guidance when they're reading that are going to immediately start lusting after the things on that list that they don't have, thereby stressing themselves.
That's exactly what happened to me.
By wanting things that they don't have yet, they're actually creating suffering in the name of elimination of suffering.
Yeah. And to be fair to Chuladasa, and in case anyone's ever watching this, he has many disclaimers and many chapters about how not to fall into this trap, how to cultivate joy, how to be easeful and not strive too much and not get too focused on the goals. There's a lot of stuff in there talking about that. But reading the book, I just ignored it. It's just let's cut out all of this hippie bullshit, get to the hardcore, stuff that works. I don't need to feel good doing this. I'm gonna do the real work. That's how I read the book the first time. I mean, obviously, not that extreme, but that was in effect the attitude that I had. Like, let's get this done. All this feel good nonsense is not for me.
I understand exactly. And I would go so far as to say, yes, Chuladasa did exactly the right thing and put all of this stuff in there, but the average Westerner who reads it, who was his target audience, is going to blow right by that. And so maybe all they need is his book and this video, and then they'll be ready to practice.
Yeah. Actually, what I did is I switched to Nisaro's way of practice for a while, which has a very different focus, where he's really all about having an enjoyable breath. Like, what kind of breath would I like to have right now? What would feel good? What would dissolve all my tensions? And it's a very relaxing and joyful way of going about Anapanasati, and that kind of showed me the difference, and then I came back to Chuladasa's way.
But the way is the same way.
Yeah.
They're just expressed in different ways. Remember that the Tao that can be said is not the Tao.
Yeah.
And that I see no contradiction from what you said. At least at this level, I see no contradiction between the teachings of Chuladasa or the teachings of Thanissaro, because they're both focused on this present moment.
Yeah.
And you remember that, what did the Buddha call himself? What was the Buddha's name for himself?
The Tathagata.
Exactly so. And what does Tathagata mean?
Well, I think the formulation we landed on last time we talked about this was one gone to thusness, or to the here now, basically, or come to the here now, I guess.
Uh-huh. So that's exactly what Tanisaro is saying, this breath. What kind of breath do you want this breath to be?
Yeah.
And so Chuladasa and Tanisaro are talking about the same thing. And there's many ways to talk about it. But the important one that we're looking at this time is to not look at progress in the sense of past and future, but the progress is in fact being satisfied with one's progress right now. In other words, satisfaction with one's progress is progress, and being dissatisfied with one's progress is not
Yeah.
progress at all.
Yeah. That's really hard for me to keep in mind. I keep forgetting that. Um, yeah. I have to constantly remind myself, or I kind of catch myself drifting back into this mind state of striving and um, causing myself unnecessary stress. And then I have to catch myself and have the catchphrase, never mind, start again.
Excellent. I like that. That's my favorite phrase from
Yeah.
Kawenka. It's his phrase. Never mind. And it's the way it's said. Is never mind. Start again. Start again.
Yeah.
Which is that expression of being on the path, and then something happens, and we wind up in the ditch. And in the ditch, we say, never mind. Start again. Then we climb out of that ditch, and we dust ourselves off, and we proceed down our happy little path.
Yeah.
That's enlightenment, is being able to get out of the ditch, pick ourselves up, because in fact the whole world is a ditch, absolutely chock-a-block full of victims who can blame all kinds of things about why they're in that ditch. They can blame the ditch, they can blame the path itself for not being a good enough path to stay on. They can blame the other victims in the ditch. Oh, this ditch would be a wonderful ditch if you weren't here. But when we're satisfied with our progress, then that means that we're on the path.
Mm.
And so in Tanisaro's frame of expression, is that a good breath or not?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, become.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Yes, that's the point that he's making, and it's a really really excellent point, and in a way it encapsulates the entire practice, because being wanting something about from the practice is stress. It is dukkha.
Yeah.
That the students would be better off by not practicing anything at all than practicing something that they feel a failure at.
Yeah. That's exactly what happened to me, where I was digging the ditch deeper and deeper every time I sat down to meditate, because I was just judging myself even more and having even more negative emotions and suffering. And then eventually it just kind of got to the point where I couldn't handle it anymore. It was just too stressful. So I quit, which obviously is not what you want. But
That, by the way, what you're talking about happens very often in the first 10-day retreat that people do. That's the number one reason why people fail in 10-day retreats or fail in a dedicated practice, is because they're wanting something from their practice rather than enjoying
Yeah.
and practice the enjoying. That's the real practice, is to practice enjoying.
Yeah. The way I've been, or the way I think about this is, I'm not focused on getting anything from the practice while I practice, but I trust that things are going to happen if I do it in the correct way. Is that also like a way of talking about this that you would agree with?
Mm-hmm. Yes, expecting good things to happen.
Yeah.
Or another way of talking about it, it does not matter what the future is going to bring. I'm prepared.
Mm.
In that and I know that it's kind of funny, but the Buddha's teaching is be a good Boy Scout. Were you ever a Boy Scout?
No, but you're referring to the always prepared thing?
Yeah, be prepared. That's the theme of the Boy Scout, is to be prepared. All right. So, in this regard, Dhamma practice is just to keep us prepared to handle this present moment. I notice I
Yeah.
didn't say be prepared for whatever the future may bring, because whenever the future does bring something, it'll always bring it in the present moment. Future never brings anything in the future. It always brings it in the present moment.
Yeah, I really like that.
So there really is no future. The future doesn't exist. All there is just one present moment after another. Getting back to the Zen and the archery, that the body's posture, pulling the arrow, mounting the arrow, drawing the arrow, and releasing the arrow is the entire practice. Where the arrow lands is not part of the practice, which is the same thing as next year's enlightenment is not part of the practice.
Yeah. Would it be the case that in the Zen tradition, would it be correct to say that if you just practice in the correct way, that eventually it will just be the case that you get really good at hitting the target? Or would that already be too much in the way of goal? Because if you do all the exercises for a really long time and you do it in the correct way, it's just inevitable that you're going to get really good at actually hitting the target, right?
Yes. Now let's look at it from two different or from a perspective that's completely different than the West. In Japan nowadays, they will have literally hundreds, if not thousands, of people go to these things that are not matches or competitions, they're exhibitions. In other words, the archers are not in competition with each other over who can do what better than the other. Every archer then can be absolute good best friends with the other archers because they're not competing with each other. And if they were competing with each other, then they would have to have a goal to compete against, such as how many arrows are in the target and which ones of the arrows are right in the center. But they're not goal oriented. In fact, in the Zen archery tradition, if there is going to be any elimination, it has nothing to do with where on the target the arrow lands. The entire target is good enough.
Mm.
All right, so the edge of the target's just as good as in the center of the target. They do not have that gradation And so that's the second part. The first part is they don't do it from competition. And they don't do it to try to make a bullseye or who can get closer to the center of the target. That's not a part of it at all. Also, part of the issue that has to do with that is the targets that they use in Zen are actually quite small, to where you can see that in Western archery they'll have a target that's this big with big bullseyes in the middle, etc., like that. The Zen target's only this big. It's a very small target.
Yeah.
And often it's just a square or a piece of wood to be hit from the horseback. So, but the target hitting was part of the original warfare of the archery, and now the actual hitting of the target is no longer nearly as important as the form and doing things correctly. So if you can have that same mentality for your spiritual practice of doing the spiritual practice, doing anapanasati, doing the Buddha's Dhamma correctly, is more important than making any improvements or matching any goals. Because always the goal is in the future. When the arrow hits the target, that time will be in the future, maybe a second or two after the arrow is released. And so if all of the attention is paid towards getting the form correct, and in fact, I remember from many years ago that that part of Zen in the art of archery is that the archer doesn't even bother to look at the target to see if he's hit it or not. That's not the issue. So he can let his arrow fly, and then he can change his posture and walk away without ever looking to see if he actually hit the target or not. That his form and the manner that they operate and the style of their behavior is almost like a slow motion Zen dance for the whole time that the archer is there. From the time he picks up his bow until the time he walks away and sets the bow down. Every small movement is controlled. And like I said, they're lucky because they've got archery and all we have is the mind. But by paying attention to the hands, you can see that that's actually the same technique that the archer's doing, except that he's got a form for how the hands are supposed to work. An example of that is, two of them. One is the power of the bow is not important. And because the power of the bow itself is not important, the holding of the arrow is different. In the West, they normally will hold it with two fingers, like this, on the edge to let it roll off. In the Zen tradition, they use the thumb and the forefinger, which does not have near as much strength, but they're not expected to hold it that long. They're expected to come out and let it go. To where in the West, after you draw the bow, then you get the target and then you release the arrow. The Zen misses that point in time because they're ready to let the arrow fly as soon as the form is reached. And it's almost like somehow or another the form that they were in was guiding the arrow rather than aiming at the target. You might want to look at some of these videos to get what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But it's not really necessary because we're not doing that practice anyway. What we need to do is to make sure that we're working on how we're doing this particular moment without expecting any results in the future from it. And that's so characteristic of the West. in the sense of, oh, I'm going to meditate today in the morning, so I'll have a good day. Well, maybe if you meditate in the morning, you'll have a good day, and as opposed to maybe if you didn't meditate, you would have a bad day. But if your meditation is so you'll have a good day, then there's no guarantee that that's going to happen.
Yeah.
The question is, can you enjoy your meditation right now? And the enjoyment of the meditation right now will probably have some nice residual effects all day.
Yeah, that's kind of more the therapeutic end of meditation, more of the stress reduction and productivity end of things.
But it comes naturally. You've heard
Yeah.
the expression, the cart before the horse? All right. Well, imagine then that doing the form right is the horse, but the cargo or the result comes after the horse. But if we put the cart before the horse, in other words, we become goal oriented, then the horse is going to have a whole lot of trouble delivering that cargo. But if we pay attention to the horse, which in this case is the mind or the form, then the cargo will naturally follow later. So we should get our mind off of the cargo and get our mind on to the right act, get it onto the horse instead, which is what the Zen archers are doing.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah.
Well, that's excellent. I'm glad. This is probably a good point then for us to just stay on this one thing. Though I thought that last time when we finished that there was going to be a question that you had arranged in advance. Do you
Yeah.
remember what that was?
There's actually many things coming up that I want to talk about.
All right. Well, go for it. Let's have at least one more then.
So so there's just to remind you what we talked about last time, or like I think now 3 or 4 times ago, was you had a talk about let's see, I think right intention that you wanted to get to, and then I kind of derailed you with asking you about meta. So that kind of got in the way there, but I think that would probably best be left to like its own session, because
All
I think
right. Well,
that
let's
might
do
get too
that.
long.
But if you'll think about it just a little bit, that's all we've been talking about today.
Oh, that's good. Then I get a 2-for-1 deal today.
Exactly. This is one's right intention. One's wrong intention is to do wrongly. One's right intention is to get the results of right behavior. Supramundane right intention is to enjoy this moment as it is right now. So ordinary right intention is to hit the target. Supramundane right intention. And when we say intention here, we're also talking about, there's many different ways to translate that word, but it's the second one on the list. And it's one of the big four. I've heard it translated as the word thought, right thought. I've heard it translated as right intention. The way that I translate it is right attitude. But right intention and right attitude are the same thing, and right attitude runs in circles around, or excuse me, right view, right effort, and especially right sati, right remembrance, run and circle around this right attitude or this right intention. So, in this regard, one's intention is to be here now. One's right view is the right view of investigating. Let's see what's going on right now. One's sati is to remember to be here now, and one's right effort is, after we remember to be here now, to actually be here now.
Yeah.
Because that's sometimes really hard. If the
Good.
hindrances are very strong, then it's sometimes hard to come out of those hindrances. But it's a major point. The Buddha talks about it as the first step of nobility. That sets the first step. Now you know that the Sotapan is a two-step process.
Hmm.
There is the path and the fruit. Okay, the work of cooking the food and then the joy of eating the food would be the way of looking at it. So in the beginning, the first step of the path is to recognize that no matter how much the hindrances are there, I can clean those hindrances out and come back to be here now. That I can see the truth of the moment, no matter how much the mind is hindered. Think about that as a major, major point. In fact, if there's any points at all that define a, a Dhamma dude from an ordinary person, this is it. This is the first step into nobility, is that no matter how much the mind is hindered, I can throw those hindrances out and come back to the present moment. Now, this will be a process. In fact, Danny last week was saying that he recognized that he kept telling himself he was having a bad day, but he kept coming out of that and said, "No, I do not have to get stuck in that hindrance of bad day." And over the course of that day, that's when he really firmly came to the absolute conclusion that no matter how much my mind says this is a bad day, I can clean that stuff out and I can come back and enjoy the moment. So, in this regard, this is all one's right intention, a right attitude. And that right attitude is, I can come out of the hindrances. Now, everything about Western society says, oh no, you can't. You not only need medicine, you need a doctor. Not only do you need a job, you also need food stamps. The Christians have really got it wrapped up because it says, hey, you can't do anything. You're no good by yourself. You're going to be stuck in sin for the rest of your existence unless you take Jesus as your Savior. You need a Savior. You can't do it on your own. So you can see how those things with the schools, you need a primary education to get a secondary education. You need a secondary education to get a job. You need a job in order to survive. And you see how they've got you trapped.
Yeah.
You need this to get that. You need this to get that. You need this to get that. And all of those things keep you in the position of being a victim. Not your right intention, certainly not your right attitude. So one's right attitude should be that of a winner. I can do this.
Yeah.
Wrong attitude is the attitude of a victim. And not only the attitude of I can do this, but better still, I am doing this right now, hippity hop.
Yeah. Can I just put in a question there?
Sure.
So I'm in terms of how confident I am that I can clean out the mind from hindrances. I'm pretty confident that in normal circumstances, just like on an average day, nothing especially out of the ordinary is happening. I'm pretty good at that. I can do it I can do it consistently, almost always on a normal day.
You need to pat yourself on the back. Don't
Yeah,
break your arm. Just pat
yeah.
yourself on the back.
I'm and I'm really enjoying that. Where if nothing special is happening, it's going pretty well. I think everything's going in the right direction, but there's still some worry and doubt about what about when a very difficult thing in life comes up. And I'm not talking about, oh, it's raining today, I'm annoyed. I'm talking about maybe losing a job, losing a loved one, um, really, or I've been dealing with some mental health stuff in the past, and I'm still worried about dealing with very negative mental states, and I don't have confidence that I can do it then.
All right. Let's look at two things then that you mentioned. One was losing a job, and the other one was losing a loved one. I don't remember the number, but it's up in the 80s. In the Majjhima Nikaya, there is a sutta to where the Buddha is giving advice to someone, and a third party overheard it, did not understand what it was, did not like it, and left grumbling and went off to play some card game or gambling or something. At that card game or that gambling session, roll of dice, bones, I don't know what they were doing, um, someone overheard him complaining, but this person who overheard that worked in the palace. And she went to report this to one of the very senior aides to the queen, who reported it to the queen, who reported it to the king. And that is the phrase, grief comes from those we love. Grief, despair comes from those we love. Now, any husband, any father would say, oh no, I enjoy my children. But you also know that it is a trauma for most families, especially mothers, to lose a child. That's about the worst thing that can happen to them because of their attachment. So if you've got someone that you love, you have to reflect in advance that when you lose them, it's going to cause you grief. The question is, can you handle that grief when it arises? The answer Dhamma Dude gives is, well, I don't want to handle that grief, but I can. I'll manage that. Possibly one of them would be for a mom, your mom dies, because that's something that's almost always a big grief. Well, that one's easy. The child, we don't expect them to die.
Mm.
But if mom died, well, she's going to die. She's gotten old. I mean, she's already 97. Give it a break. In fact, by the time someone gets that old, half the kids want to push her off the ledge anyway.
Yeah.
All right, so that's the way of looking at it, is over time, attitudes change, even about loved ones. But anyone that you love, if you lose them, it's going to cause you grief. So you might want to reflect upon what it's going to be like and how you're going to handle each of the people one after another as you lose them, because there's going to be one guy that you lose that's really going to cause you a lot of grief. Martin.
Mm. Yeah.
But if you can get ready for your own death, then that will help you prepare for the death of others that are going to be happening around you. And there's another one. Actually, it goes under a big rubric, and that is the experience of death. Now, in the West, because of the culture that we live in, the whole culture and everybody in it does everything they can to avoid death. Most of the people who die in America die in the hospital. And as soon as they're dead, they're whisked down to the basement. And just a very, very few people ever deal with a dead body. But those people who do deal with a dead body often are not very much afraid of death because they see it a lot. They've gotten used to it. Okay? So if we can change the example is, how about getting a shot at the doctor, a hypodermic needle? The first time you have one, it's terrible. But if you've had dozens of them, and especially if you're a nurse, you'll actually let students practice on you because you've gotten used to it. So the Buddha did this also. He sent his monks to the charnel ground. This is where they dumped dead bodies in the old days. Instead of having a garbage dump, they would have a body dump. They didn't bury them. They didn't smoke them or cremate them or anything. They just had a charnel ground. And later, I think they figured out that's disease prone. That's not a very good idea to just dump all the dead bodies out in a particular area. But the Buddha sent his guys out there to start studying and learning about death. Goenka actually had a set of films on autopsies. I don't think that they probably got many autopsies on YouTube, but there are probably autopsies on the internet. So getting used to seeing the human body busted apart, falling apart, cut up, etc., like that. That helps us to get used to things. So that by the time you lose someone, you'll have already gotten your mind prepared for it.
Yeah.
And so this would be one's right intention. The intention is that when it is time to deal with grief, I will. Because I'm dealing with it in small ways all along. And so when the big grief comes, I can handle it.
Yeah.
Again, Boy Scout, be prepared. This is one of the ways of getting prepared for the grief that you're going to experience on the death and breakup of the body that you'll experience through other people and your own. It's going to happen.
Yeah. That's actually the way. That's actually the way I've started to view all of this practice stuff. Is I want to be prepared for the really difficult times, because
if you are, then they're not difficult at all, are they?
Yeah.
They're just another event. Oh, Mom died.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad that you're or I'm glad to hear that you think this is a good way of going about it, where right now nothing especially difficult is happening, so I'm really trying to put as much effort into the practice as I can, because it's easy right now, because there are not many like traumatic, difficult things happening, so that when they happen, I can be ready. That's what I'm thinking.
But here's the point, that by practicing and practicing correctly, we're not creating those difficult things anymore. An example of that would be the people who suffer the most over the loss of someone are the ones who feel guilty that they didn't say goodbye, or that they had a feud with someone and they didn't straighten it out. So people who are angry at their daddy when the daddy dies, they're the ones who are going to suffer the most out of remorse and guilt as well as grief. It all gets mixed together on a really bad day. But if you've already said goodbye, Dad, hope you have a good one, then when he goes, you can say, okay, there he went. So getting prepared, that's the way of looking at it. What are the things that will cause you grief so that you can be ready for them so that they won't? And one of those would be having good relationships with the people so that when they die, the relationship is just coming to a natural end rather than an abrupt,
Mhm.
comes to a good end rather than to a nasty end with a lot of grief and guilt built into it. So, if we have good relationships with our the people who we cling to, then when we lose them, it'll be much easier than if we were not in a good relationship with them, and we can say goodbye easily.
Mhm.
All right. So now let's talk about the second one, and that is loss of a job.
Yeah, I'm actually much less worried about that one.
It
That's comparatively easy.
is comparatively easy. Depends upon who you are.
Yeah.
Some students will have a whole lot of trouble with that, but one of the ways that makes that easier is by coming out of materialism. The people who need the job the most are the ones who are spending the most. If we stop spending, then the job becomes much less important. In America right now, they're talking about that wages are so low that people have to have two or even three jobs to make ends meet. Seems to me they ought to be looking at these ends that they're trying to meet rather than looking at how to fill the gap.
Yeah. Yeah, that seems very reasonable to me. Um, and I'm actually working towards that actively. Um, seeing, will I really, like Tenisero talks about this a lot. For example, with food, where look at the attitude you have towards food. Are you
Mm-hmm.
are you indulging, or are you just eating to keep the body nourished, to keep yourself going and healthy, or are you trying to diet down to look better? Are you trying to get like a bodybuilder type muscle body?
Mm-hmm.
And he says no, just have that attitude of nourishing the body, keeping yourself healthy, and that's um, yeah. I've had to learn that the hard way. Let's say.
By the way, this is discussed in Sutta number 2 under the Sabha Asaba, under the four requisites. And that passage in the suttas is actually written out in some meditation centers for the students to repeat before they sit down to eat. Um, Something on the order of with mindfulness, I take this food not for fattening, not for purification,
Yeah.
but only for the maintenance, continuation of the body. A lot of people will have a lot of anxiety around eating. And so, if they do, the recommendation would be to stop eating and to eliminate that anxiety and then come back to eat so that you can actually enjoy the eating. And that anxiety around eating is something that is instinctual, that goes all the way back in time to where you've got, you can see it in fact with the dogs, that if a dog has a piece of food that's too big for him to eat or chew, then he will carry it away over to a private place so that he can set it down safely and eat the food. If you notice that just with dogs, you can recognize, oh, well, people do the same thing. In other words, now that I've got this food, oh my goodness, this is dangerous. Somebody may start fussing at me, and that happens at the dinner table all the time. The parents somehow think that teaching table manners should be done while people are eating food, and all they do is give their children anxiety about eating.
Yeah.
So that food reflection, can go really, really deep to really, really look at the way that we eat. And when we do when we're eating, pay attention to what's going on the inside of the mouth. When you're eating, just the eating, chewing, recognizing the various textures and flavors and juices and all of that kind of stuff, and make sure that we're chewing correctly and that we're swallowing intentionally, paying attention to how we eat. And so this is another thing that goes along with the fact that in the West, they seem to think that a good time is that we have to go out to a fancy restaurant and spend a lot of money. And now I've got to work for 2 days to pay for last night's supper.
Yeah.
And so if we stop looking at going to fancy restaurants in order to feel good, that is actually not the place that we eat, but it's the food itself. And so Dhammadus actually don't go out to eat much. Don't go out much. We just accept whatever's there. That's actually an ongoing joke between my wife and I. Because she'll ask me, what do you want? And I say, what do you have? Because my intention is, whatever you cook, make it easy on yourself. But she gets exasperated because she can cook anything. And so then we go through a sparring thing about, how about this and how about that? Yeah, okay, so that's the way that we come to it. But it's all with the concept of that we don't need anything fancy. Make it really easy. And when the food is very easy, or our whole life of materialism becomes easy, in the sense of all of the four requisites, then we dress easy. You know, modern day, it seems like that dressing easy has become much more of a common thing. But if you look back just not even 100 years, the clothes made the man. How someone was dressed determined everything about them. And so people would dress up as best they could, and to now, even in recent times, wearing a suit to an interview. Well, 50 years ago, you wore a suit every Sunday. You could not call dead in South Carolina not dressed in a suit on Sunday. All right? So, but now we can see that people, especially high techies, they go to an interview in a t-shirt and jeans, cut off jeans. So the clothes don't make the man. The mind makes the man, not the clothes. I remember when I was a child reading, and this was right in there, this was actually the kind of stuff that they teach children, that the clothes make the man. And the story goes is that two guys are going to rob a store. And that the mastermind gets the idea, oh, I tell you what, why don't you dress up in a police costume? That way you can stand in front of the store while I rob it, and we won't have any trouble and we can get away easily. And so the accomplice is standing in front of the store dressed like a policeman, and all the kids and people come by and say, how do you do, officer? I'm glad to see you on duty, and all of that kind of stuff. And by the time his accomplice came out of robbing the store, his accomplice dressed in the police suit, he arrested his fellow because he had become a policeman in his mind. And in that regard, the clothes do make the man. And you can see that with all the places that is still left, to where the job you do determines the clothes you wear. Therefore, the clothes indicate who you are, and because of that, that determines who you are. The clothes do make the man. Examples: admirals, airline pilots, police, rabbis.
Yeah.
Where the clothes make the man. Well, we know as Dhammadus, clothes don't make the man. And in fact, the fewer clothes and the less clothes you wear, the better off you are.
Yeah.
And in that regard, if you can come out of materialism about the clothes you wear, the house you live in, the food you eat, and that you take the adequate medicine, but you're not a hypochondriac, then guess what? We don't need nearly the amount of money that we thought that we did, so that we have to hold down 3 jobs just to make ends meet. Hey, I should be looking at my ends to see how I can get them to meet
Yeah.
by not trying to pack in so much materialism. That's an issue then, that once you realize that you really don't even need your job. But in the West, they have run that trip. Why? And I think that it actually started in the Industrial Revolution, because before the Industrial Revolution, when people lived in an agrarian society, starvation was not dependent upon how hard you worked on the farm. It depended upon things that you had no control over. How much rain there was going to be, whether or not the feudal lord came and took half your grain away, or anything like that, that people did not see their behavior as 100% determining their lifestyle. But nowadays, it seems to, in the sense of how hard you work will depend upon how good your life is. And here you wind up with a lot of people working very hard and are being miserable, expecting something in the future and never getting it. Never getting it. So the question is, at your job, can you enjoy your job? If you're enjoying your job, if you're enjoying what you're doing, then that's satisfaction enough. If you're not enjoying the job, then go find something that you will enjoy. What happens with that, after people change jobs several times, they recognize, wait a minute, every time I change jobs, I keep bringing the same problems with me. Maybe it's my problem and not the
Yeah.
job's problem.
Yeah. There's this book by John Kabat-Zinn. It's called Wherever You Go, There You Are.
There you are.
Yeah.
And so again, we're talking about right intention, right attitude. The enjoyment of the job is far more important than the paycheck. And if people can learn that, then you'll have a whole lot more happy population,
Yeah.
and maybe wages will rise if they can. If they can set the situation so that the wages are so low that people need 3 jobs, and the people do 3 jobs, then they can keep the wages low. But if somebody says, okay, well, I need 3 wages to meet my lifestyle, but I'm not going to work 3 jobs, I'm only going to work one and only meet a third of my lifestyle and be happy with meeting a third of it, then surprisingly enough, the wages will have to rise.
Yeah.
Because who's going to do those other 2 jobs that weren't done because I didn't do them?
Yeah.
And so, in a way, the people are shooting themselves in the foot with their own greed. If people would stop being so greedy, the government would have to improve.
Yeah. One thing that, so I really agree, and I enjoy hearing stuff I agree with. But let's say I'm dealing with family members who disagree in terms of get a good job that pays well, that's secure, don't worry, like get a pension going, get some, save up some money, not necessarily in terms of like get filthy rich or anything, but in terms of have a very steady income, make like good money, have a stable job, and there's the enjoyment or the satisfaction from the job is more of an afterthought, and I find it difficult to kind of hold my own like ground on that position when confronted with that many times.
When you tell me that, I'm reminded that I've got several students currently, all young men, dealing with that very issue.
Maybe
In
we should get
state,
together for a group chat.
all right, I'll tell you their names. This Danny and Willie are both dealing with these. But the way that I'm talking about it is daddy issues
Oh yeah.
as opposed to work issues. Why? It's
Yeah.
because it's the family, especially daddy, who wants to live his life vicariously. He is dissatisfied with his own life, and
Yeah.
so he wants his son at least to be, you know, better off than he was.
I'm seeing you've been in my mind recently.
Not recently, no, long time ago. Been there, done that for sure,
Yeah,
but not recently.
it's almost scary how similar the things are. Because without even telling you almost anything, that's probably 75% accurate at least to my situation.
Hmm. Well, that should point not to my wisdom, rather, it should point to the typicality of the situation.
Hmm.
That the situation is similar. Everyone winds up in that situation, especially Dhamma dudes who begin to look at their lives in a completely different way. And then they go and they talk to their family about it, and then the family does not like this because they
Yeah.
don't have the background that you've had. They haven't spent many hours of sitting meditation and figured things out and read the Dhamma and listened to old parts on the internet and all of that kind of stuff. They haven't done that. And so they still have the same mindset. So instead of being me against my family, think about it as two different mindsets that are meeting. The mindset of the
Yeah.
Dhamma versus the mindset of Western civilization.
Yeah. I feel like I'm very clear on the fact that pursuing material wealth through like a very high paying job or something, or even like working very long hours and really putting everything you have into it just to get money out of it, I'm very confident that that's not the way to go. Like I'm very sure of that because I can.
Well,
It's
that
easy to
means that
see
the
how that
doubt about it,
leads. Yeah.
you see, but your family still has doubts about
Yeah.
that because they've heard both sides. More than likely, they have had some sort of Christian background.
Oh yeah.
Well, Jesus teaches the same thing that the Buddha teaches in that regard. And so when the Christians come to this society that we live in, there's a conflict. And the conflict never is resolved, and they're left in a state of doubt. So if you want to talk to them about it, talk about it in a language that they will understand.
Hmm.
Also, there's more of a natural way of looking at it, not just Christianity and Jesus being on that side, but anybody through their own logic will recognize they're not really satisfied with their job. There's got to be something better than this.
Yeah.
And then there are Dhamma dudes by the score, by the thousands, who actually go through the process of getting a high education, getting good jobs, getting into the system, climbing the ladder, and recognizing this is not helping at all.
Yeah.
I'm feeling worse now than I did when I was making straight A's in college. And even then, I wasn't feeling wonderful. And so, even though they're winners by all of the standards they've been taught their whole lives, they feel like losers. These guys are ready to become Dhamma dudes because they've already gone to the end of their doubt. They've recognized this is not the path. But unfortunately, not just by the score or by the thousand, but by the literal hundreds of millions are those who never figure that out. An example of that kind of people would be the very people that Donald Trump has chosen for his cabinet.
Mm.
Every one of them is super rich, and every one of them is a criminal, continuing to be criminal behavior to get even richer because they do not understand that money is not the route to happiness.
Yeah, it's it's very, it's all very true. I just, I have to keep reminding myself of that. It's like
Well,
the
that's
other thing.
because you have been
Yeah,
programmed
yeah,
for 20 something years
yeah,
that you have to strive, you have to work hard, you have to compete, you have to
yeah,
win. Only then can you feel good.
yeah. I keep forgetting, and then I get really, I get really miserable for a while, and then I remember again, and I kind of snap out of it. But it's
Excellent.
really easy to get caught in that,
Hmm.
to kind of slip back into that mindset.
Exactly. But then, no matter how obstructed the mind gets with that stuff, you can clean it out and come back. That's the important point. Yes, you do get stuck in it, but not for long, and not as long as you used to.
Yeah,
And
that's
recognize
true.
that one time you were stuck in it solidly for years.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's true. All right, good.
So we've talked about right intention in the sense of right
Yeah,
attitude.
I actually looked back at my notes from when we talked, and I I'm sad to have misinformed you. You actually wanted to talk about right view and not right intention, but this was good. These were some
It's
things I
actually
was.
preliminary for it anyway. We'll get into right view.
All right,
Yes.
all right.
Remind yourself to ask me next time.
Yeah, I've got it. I've got it in my got my little notebook here. So
All right. Well, we'll label this one Zen and the Art of Archery and not hitting the target.
all right, perfect. Yeah, I think I have everything I need for today. It's time to go
Okay.
sit.
Excellent. Excellent.
Thank you so much for your time today.
May you have a happy, happy day.
All right, I will. See you next time.
See you.